Hi there. Welcome back to Kari's Confessions, a nonprofit exec tells all. I'm Kari Anderson, principal with Incite Consulting. I've spent 25 plus years in the nonprofit sector in leadership roles with 7 organizations. Now I provide coaching and consulting services to ensure that nonprofits like yours have the structure, systems, and practices to do your best work. Wherever I go, I continue to hear that nonprofit execs need a space to gather, to receive tools, feedback, and advice that encourage them to stay the course. Doesn't matter if you're in a village of 182 or a metropolis of millions, nonprofit work continues to be both gratifying and lonely. I'm here to make sure that you have a chance to breathe, laugh, smirk, get excited again about the important work that you do. So, today's topic, budgeting is a team sport. It's true. And when I think about the team sport, right, it's going to differ based on whom all is in your organization, but budgeting cannot be done by yourself. That means the board chair, that means the executive director, that means the board treasurer, right? It needs to involve a team. You get to decide how large in order for this process to work. So, 3 takeaways, right, that I think that you'll receive today, right, and hopefully take back to your organization. Really just talking about what a budget is, I continue to be surprised as to how many organizations really do not understand what a budget is or the importance of one. Really being able to articulate, not only to yourself, right? It's a good mantra, but to others, why good budgeting matters for your business. Remember, we are running a business. And the third takeaway, why involving your team, again, you get to decide how large that team is crucial for budget buy in, adherence, and accountability. So, what's a budget and what's a nonprofit budget in particular, right? One way to look at this is that it's a planning document, right? We don't need to make it as scary as possibly it is in your head, right? It's a planning document to track your expenses and revenue. For small organizations or baby organizations, it's really going to be simple. It might be on an Excel spreadsheet to begin with, but then we migrate to QuickBooks quickly, right? Put another way, right? We think about a budget in terms of revenue and expenses. It's how you dictate your resource or how you dedicate your resources based on priorities for your organization. So, revenue, again, can include, depending on how large or how small your organization and how you've structured your business, program fees, earned income, grants, philanthropic contributions, maybe membership dues. Expenses include administrative program and fundraising expenses. And those may be large or small, again, dependent on the size of your organization. So when I'm thinking about what comprises an organizational budget, certainly revenue and expenses over a specific future period of time. And once you've got those, right, revenue and expenses, we compile and we reevaluate on a periodic basis. A budget is not a static document, right? You may have some projections that you have at the beginning of your fiscal year, but those may change based on what's happening in terms of business or cash flow. And that's why it's so important to be able to continue to readdress those numbers. You're going to approve a budget at the beginning of your fiscal year, ideally before that fiscal year starts, so you know how much money you have to be able to work with or how much money you need to raise. But then you need to monitor, right, to make sure that if there's changes, right, or discrepancies, that you can adjust and don't end up going, into the red for your business unless that's a planned piece, right? And we can talk more about that later. Budgets can be made for any entity, right, that wants to spend money, and you've got to have one in order for your business to be successful. So think about this, right? And especially those of you that are petrified of budgeting. It's a financial plan for a defined period, normally a year, right? It literally can be your revenue and expenses, but it's time for you to start to get comfortable with money, right? They are essential for operating at peak efficiency. Even if your peak efficiency this year is $20,000, that's what you're striving to be able to bring in and expend in your first year as a not for profit organization. So, aside for earmarking resources, right, a budget also aids in setting goals, measuring outcomes, and planning contingencies for your organization. And it's a critical component in making sure that your business stays solvent, right? So, Now that you kind of get, right, but it's not so scary. Literally, it's expenses and your revenues, right? So, why does good budgeting matter at your organization? And again, with baby steps, right? Us becoming more and more proficient with numbers and budgeting. So, numbers, right? A budget helps us make informed decisions about timing, right? That timing could look like, is it time for us to be able to take on a new project, program, or initiative? Do we have the funds available to support that? Is the timing right to be able to hire a new staff member, right? Budgets and numbers give you data points to be able to work with to make informed decisions. Why else might good budgeting matter? Well, accurately tracking goals, both short and long term, for your organization. Certainly, budgets provide tangible, right? Real numbers that we not only report to the board, but we also share with donors to be able to keep donors informed of the work that we do. Good budgeting, right, is used as a critical component of strategy, right? It helps to impact our programming. It helps to impact our fundraising. Good budgeting impacts operations, administration, all building block components of a healthy nonprofit organization. A strong budget helps you navigate financial decisions in challenging times. Boy, did we not have that during COVID, right? Strong budgets in challenging times can help to navigate financial downturns. They can navigate if there happens to be a drop in donor revenues for your organization. But if we've got a budget and you can look at the numbers that show our trends and our trajectories, that can help you and the board make informed decisions about where you may need to pause spending, where you may need to cut spending, or maybe where you need to grow revenues. When you're thinking about a budget, right? And the importance of planning, calendaring time and having consistent time, not only to plan, but to be able to monitor is really critical. If you're in the role of an executive director, most organizations I work with work on a calendar fiscal year, right? So January through December. And so my encouragement always for those organizations is there better be draft budgets that are starting to occur in September and October every year, right? And they need to have a couple different drafts that run through your organization and through the board. But we want to have that budget approved in December so that you can start your new fiscal year in January knowing exactly here's our budget and here's what we need to bring in terms of revenues and here's where we have approved allocation of expenses and expenditures, right? And so since budgeting is supposed to be a team sport and oftentimes you need to involve others in this planning process, that's why starting early is so important, right? Trying to wing this thing together in December or worse into January and February and then not having an approved budget for that calendar year is really really tough. So, third, right? Third takeaway, right? Team sport, whom to involve, whether it's board members or team members. I want you to think about what you either have been successful at budgeting or what you haven't been successful at and why. And it usually has to do with whom you've involved in the planning process, whom you've involved in the monitoring process, and how you've communicated that work, right? So I always think about using your team, right? And the board in particular to help identify financial goals. What do we want to accomplish in the coming year? What obstacles might be ahead of us that we need to plan for monetarily? Are there changes that are coming that we've got to plan and budget for? If you are fortunate enough to have staff, some of us do, right? Some of us don't. Ask them what resources are lacking, critical items that they need to effectively carry out their roles. And if we're asking everyone those pieces, right? Making sure that there's buy in order to be able to plan and execute an effective budget for your organization. But if we're not talking, right, about the big things that we need in order to be able to fulfill mission, then we're going to be back on our heels, right? The budget will have been approved. You may have to, amend the budget, which is, of course, a possibility for organizations but better on the front end, right? When we're planning for the following fiscal year to be able to think about these things. Something else that I always think about that we don't do a great job of planning for and budgeting is professional development. And that's not just for you, right, as the executive director and your team. Again, if you are lucky enough to have them, it's for your board, right? Oftentimes, we think about, our boards are volunteers, right? And many of them don't have prior board experience when they come on and join you, or they've had other board experience but haven't received professional development. We are expecting them to be accountable and responsible for risk management, for financial oversight, right? Serving as a fiduciary, managing, right? And holding you accountable. But how can they do that effectively if they don't know what they're supposed to be doing? So budgeting for professional development for board members is critical, right? So once you kind of figured out who needs to be around the table and that you've opened the door to have some larger conversations about what's important in the budget, having a template, right, and an approach that can help people get on the same page and allows you to be consistent is really important. There are a myriad of them out there. Use Google, right? There's plenty of them out there, but oftentimes QuickBooks also has a fabulous template for you to work with. Certainly, when I'm thinking about the creation of the budget after we've done some brainstorming about the most important things we need to fund, we need to be realistic about estimating funding revenue sources, right? It's wonderful if you've received X amount of money and Y amount of money from grantors or foundations or from a special event year after year. But our job is to make sure that we're being conservative about what those revenues are. And then, of course, when we're building a fund development plan that supports the budget, we need to put in much more in terms of prospecting and pipeline development than we think we're going to need to in order to be able to reach those revenue goals. We also need to be mindful of expenses. I would rather that you overestimate what you may have to spend on things than underestimate so that there's not a surprise. I'd mentioned the need, right, for professional development, but think about where else you might need that. Are there some volunteer opportunities where we really need to train folks up so we can make sure that that's in your budget? Making sure, right, that we do a dry run with this budget through finance committee, and then it goes to the entire board for discussion and approval, right? And this piece is so important because, again, if you're creating this budget in a vacuum, there's no accountability organization wide, right? Just like if the board was creating the budget in a vacuum, there's no buy in from you and your team. So, budget, right, is created by you and the finance committee, and then the finance committee takes to the board for discussion and approval. If the entire board has approved the budget, everyone is responsible for ensuring that not only we stay within the budget, but also that the funds are raised to support those expenses, right? It's not a document that gets tucked away after approval. It's a tool you'll continue to use at board meetings and staff meetings. When discussing financials, it's a resource to aid staff in making program decisions, and it's certainly an accountability tool for you as the chief executive officer for your organization to ensure that we're doing right by donor investments, right? There are a myriad of available resources to help you with budgeting. I would certainly suggest first reaching out to your state nonprofit associations for the fabulous tools they already have. Of course, you're welcome to email me for my favorites, right? So, as we wrap up today, right, here's three pieces for you to consider. If your team or board is really struggling because of where you are in life cycle about what's the big deal about a budget and what is one anyway, let's have that conversation first, right? Money shouldn't be scary. And really being able to distill it down into the most simplest points will actually help people start to understand and adhere to it. The second piece, right? Really thinking about why good budgeting matters. This might be a piece that you've struggled with and have kind of kicked the can, down the road in terms of really being mindful about why we need to dig into our numbers and how we could grow in terms of professional development for our team. And the third piece, really thinking about whom on your team should be involved in the budgeting process to ensure buy in, adherence, and accountability. So make sure to continue to follow me on your favorite streaming platforms, including YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. For additional resources and tools, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can also check out my website at inciteconsultinggroup.com. Thanks for joining me today and have a great week.